There are a lot of different varieties of cancers now. We know that. You know that. I'm not telling you anything new. But what there's a lot of different variations of why someone gets a cancer, to what degree they get a cancer, to what degree. So all kinds of different variables, lots of them. Okay? Now, science and research doesn't care about the variables. We're not there yet. As far as science and research goes, no one cares about all the different reasons someone gets a certain cancer and someone else doesn't, or someone gets a certain variety of a mutated version of a cancer and someone doesn't, or someone gets sick in a certain way with the cancer, like it kills someone but doesn't kill another person. All these different variables. Because the reason why it's all man behind cancer to begin with. I'm not talking about any bad people, that are trying to help people and help cure people of cancer and help. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about all the different things created of why we deal with cancer now. Exposure, talking about solvents, all the different solvents we're exposed to all the time. And the chemical agents, all the different chemical agents, we're thousands of chemical agents, all the different pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, insecticides, whatever, all those different ones. Radiation exposure, not just radiation, different types of radiation exposure all the time. And that's just a fraction of it. Then there's something else. See, someone has to have two things. There has to be two things that someone has to have in their body to create the possibility of cancer. There has to be two things in someone's body, you guys, to create cancer. Even though there's all these different solvents and these different agents and different heavy metals, different pesticides, different radiations, varieties of radiation, different, nanotechnology, and everything else, even though that's all there, there's chemicals falling out of the sky, even though that's all there, there has to be two things. That's one thing, that's one group, that's one thing. But you have to have something else. You have to have a virus. You have to have a viral nature inside the body. It has to be a virus inside the body, or viruses inside the body. So there are two things someone has to have in order to create cancer. Two things. They have to have chemical agent of some kind, which is a toxin of some kind. And they have to have a virus. That's the two things. And then you got the possibility of possible cancer, And if, unless you do things like get toxins out of the body, unless you do things like knock any viruses down, then you never get cancer. Even if you have the virus and the toxins. But if they get out of control, more toxins accumulate, more toxins build up, more toxins, pile on top of itself and build up in different organs, different places of the body, and the brain, and even the stomach. Stomach holds so many toxins. It goes into the lining of the stomach, wherever these toxins are, liver, everywhere, pancreas, you name it. And then the virus. The virus is increasing in numbers if it's proliferating, if it's growing. And that's the other factor. It's these two things. And that's the difference of what you're going to hear. This is another difference all on its own. So there has to be a toxin, there has to be a virus. The variations are endless, though, to what virus and what virus strain. The variations are endless to what virus and what virus strain. And is the virus mutated? What kind of virus? Is it mutated? And how many toxins someone has? Do they just have a few heavy metals and a little bit of radiation? Do they have different varieties do they have all kinds of different things? Do they have, carpet chemicals, going through their body? From carpet cleaning services? Are they getting their homes sprayed? Are they eating only conventional produce nonstop and only that? But if someone has to be forced to eat conventional produce nonstop, I understand. it's more affordable in so many ways for so many people. But there's things you could do to still clean up the pesticides while you have to eat that way. And you're still getting benefits from those foods that help counter that. But the bottom line is, and what I'm trying to say is the endless variations. And then how strong the person's immune system is. So how strong the person's immune system is matters too. That makes a huge difference. So each person is different. Everybody's different. Okay? Everybody's different. Someone can smoke cigarettes for 50 years and not develop lung cancer. Someone could never smoke ever, but they happen to breathe in a lot of hairspray over the years, over the decades, to try to get their hair looking prettier a certain way. So they're just spraying hairspray. And someone breathe in hairspray, and for some reason they get lung cancer. Someone, not spraying anything, gets lung cancer and didn't smoke a day in their life. I mean, I've seen people smoke a lifetime and not get lung cancer and not get any cancer, because one of those things that I talked about, the two things, one of those things wasn't there. It wasn't there. Apparently they had the toxins. They were able to smoke for 50 years, 60 years, 70 years. They had the toxins. That's the one thing, remember? And the other thing, the viruses, they didn't have. They didn't have the viruses. They didn't have a virus. And I've seen that. I mean, I've seen that for decades happen. Because there has to be two things. There has to be two things. And the variations matter, including stress, because adrenaline doesn't help either. Adrenaline can be really noxious, can be really toxic, and really difficult to deal with. Cancer research, like I said, is based on cancer that's manifested already. That's what it's really based on. It always has been. It's about, okay, that's it. There it is. Let's biopsy it. Let's cut it out. Let's do what we got to do. I mean, whatever. I'm not saying that that's bad or good. Everybody has choices they make and directions they go to how they handle a situation and how they deal with it. And some people, they get surgery. Some people don't. Some people get chemo. Some people just get radiation. There's a whole vast differences to how many people and what they do. And cancer clinics have gotten a lot better. They have gotten a lot better. It's not like the dark ages, and that's true. They have improved in so many different ways. They've reduced and lowered variations of chemotherapy. They're working on targeting what chemotherapy works with what cells and so forth. And so there's definitely differences that have made a difference in people's lives. And I stand behind science and research 100%. You need to know that. One of the things that happens is when I talk about how science research hasn't discovered this, or they don't understand this, or maybe something trickled down the line that's not in your best interest, it doesn't mean I don't believe or love medical research and science, and I don't stand behind it and love the people behind it and what they're doing. You need to know that. It's important. But you also need to know the other side, or the pieces of it to fill in. So, with the pesticides and the herbicides and everything else we have going on, and not just that, the different metals and all the different toxins and the solvents, that's one aspect of it. And then you have to have the viral present that's the other side of it. Now, why? Why will that create cancer? So back to this. Why will that create cancer? Because the virus has to have something to feed on. It has to have a fuel. It has to have something it can eat, something that it can consume. And you might be a biologist or something right now listening, and you're like, viruses don't eat anything. No, that's not true. That's misinformation. They even teach in school. Viruses eat. That's how they produce. They eat. They can't produce if they don't get the food they need. And if you don't have a virus in you, then you don't have to worry. I mean, but chemicals and harmful substances don't do us any good and can give us other health conditions and problems and cause all kinds of variations, like tumors that are benign, like the tumors back in the day in 400 BC when the word cancer was created, and it was a benign tumor. It wasn't cancerous cells that we deal with today, because that's a new thing in history. But the benign tumors back in 400 BC were filled with heavy metals, especially back in the day, in the Rome day, in the Greek, all that day, back that time in history, in Greece, all that time in history, what was going on there was heavy metals were saturating the waterways. Everybody was using heavy metals like never before in history. And there were some toxic substances for certain varieties of minerals and chemistry starting, nothing like it did in the Industrial Revolution, but it created toxic problems such as tumors that weren't cancerous. And those tumors have to feed too, but cancer cells need the very toxins I was talking about before. They need those toxins in order to survive, in order to eat, in order to turn into something, A viral cell is not a cancer cell. It's not a cancer cell. Nope, not yet. It's not a cancer cell. So a virus cell has to eat, and what it does, if it's eating a poison, it has to eliminate it. And this is where we're going to go into more information. So fasten your seatbelts again. I know I'd probably drive you crazy, you guys, with that one. But, get ready. Get your herbal tea out, whatever you need, and the whole bit. It's important because we're going into some good stuff here. So a virus consumes a toxin, a solvent, a pesticide, a heavy metal, a plastic, a fernan, a dioxin. Dioxin, the age of dioxins is upon us. That's one of virus's favorite foods for cancer producing. A dioxin itself doesn't necessarily create cancer. If you saturate a rat in the lab with dioxins, the rat will have viruses. There's no question. The rat will have viruses within it to feed off the dioxin to create a cancer. So, and I mean pesticides like DDT too, all those are still in our environment. I talk about that so many times, and if I can't cover everything right now. I'd love to talk about DDT for an hour. I can't. You just have to keep on looking into all my past shows and things I do. But what happens is once that virus consumes a toxin, it remanufactures. It's a remanufacturing industrial machine itself is that tiny viral cell. And it remanufactures the toxin. It changes the chemical compounds of the chemical structure. The biochemical turns it into a biohazard worse than it was originally, turns it into a biohazard in a worse state, than it originally was to begin with. And then it releases it into the body's atmosphere as something far greater in strength and destructive. Far more aggressive to the body. This new toxin saturates an area of tissue, especially if a virus happens to be near an area of tissue, such as, say, if a virus is near or in the thyroid. So as it's eating the food it wants, it releases it. So that would be a thyroid cancer. So as it releases the toxin in an area, a tissue, or an organ, more cells die around it from that toxin, because the cells are being poisoned. So when the virus remanufactures and it releases that toxin into tissue, and this information isn't out there. This is a big part of the information that's not out there. And it's important for you to write down your notes, because I don't want you forgetting and I don't want you missing out. And once that toxic remanufactured poison's released back into an organ or into some tissue, and not just floating around the body, if it's close to an organ or anything like that, more cells die in that tissue. They die of a stink of death. Basically what that means is that virus's poison kills cells. It kills cells. Those cells actually are dying differently than when cells naturally die and create toxins. So as cells naturally die and create toxins in our body on a healthy level, that's different. These cells were poisoned to death. They were living cells, and now they're poisoned to death. And there's a decaying process, and they're very toxic. And then that can even be released throughout the bloodstream, which lowers the immune system and the immune function, which is part of all this. And a lot of these rotting cells can also stay in that adjacent area, with whether it's in a thyroid or an organ or anything. But these cells have a signature attached to them now. They have a signature because of the poison that from the virus. The virus put a chemical compound on in these poisons. And so there's a signature. These dying, decaying cells prompt an additional viral response. So more viruses are coming. More viral cells are coming. And when they come, these viral cells, they engage in an area where the first viral attack was, for instance, say on a thyroid. So they engage in that area where these first cells were dying. The viruses then consume more damaged dying cells that were first contaminated originally. And they remanufacture the toxic dead cell material. Okay, now we're remanufacturing again. We're remanufacturing something that was remanufactured. The poison initially that got into the cells that killed it was already remanufactured once. This is an very important understanding. But when the virus starts to eat those dead, decaying cells that have the once already remanufactured poison, the virus remanufactures the poison again. The living virus cell remanufactures the poison again. That's what it does. I'm going to tell you, that's not good. So it remanufactures those toxic dead cells. This is a process that doubles the toxic strength. It doubles the toxin strength. So as the new viruses digest and release the once again remanufactured poison again, it's in double strength, double trouble. It's in double strength, double in strength. It's synthesized like a little chemical factory, synthesized. And to give you an example of when you take chemicals in their basic structures, you mix them, you spin them in the big vats in the chemical companies. I won't name the companies, but you spin them, you work them, and you do the whole process. And then you take a portion of that, not all of it. You take a little portion and you add it to another batch, and you do this whole mixing, and this whole thing occurs. It's almost like each vat of chemicals gobbles up a small amount they keep on passing on to the next one, and it gobbles it up. Then they take a portion of that. It's called reverse homeopathy in a way. Reverse homeopathy for destructive natures, not for healing the body, but for building destructive warfare chemicals and so forth, and insecticides and skull and crossbones crap, you name it. It's that. So this is kind of like that. That's an example. It's similar in some way. So basically, it's like I'm saying, it's similar to the chemical factories creating more potent versions of a chemical compound, synthesizing. Now, if this process continues, the poison gets stronger and stronger. It can quadruple in strength and then get even stronger. And don't get scared. Don't get worried. This isn't a scary show. This show's a powerful show to give you an understanding you never had before, so you can do something about it and really protect yourself. Like, really protect yourself. Not just stupid protecting talk. Like, really protect yourself. Good stuff. Really good stuff. It's important to know all this. So the poison severely mutates. And then what happens is the viruses start to adapt for that new poison. So the viruses are eating these denatured cells, these dying cells that are in a little tissue, a little organ tissue. They're eating these cells that have already been remanufactured even once or twice. And they're eating these cells. And the viruses themselves can't even handle the level of toxin they created to begin with. The virus can't even handle the level of toxin that it had created. It's too much for the virus itself, the original virus that started out. It's way too much. And you're hearing for the first time in history, anywhere, right here, how a virus mutates, because no one else will tell you because they don't know. There's no lab. There's no chemistry lab. There's no biology place. There's no, immune expert out there that knows. It doesn't exist. I'm just letting you know. I'm not trying to do that to be cocky sounding and egomaniac. That's not it at all. It's because if I don't give you the point, then you just probably think this stuff's online somewhere, and you go out looking around and you find some other interesting little tidbit of information, and you just you lose this. That's why I say what I say. So the deal is the virus itself gets poisoned. In order to not let the virus die, which a few of them end up dying from that noxious poison, from that toxic poison. A few of them do die. Viruses. And you say, hey, that's great. That's perfect. In that situation, it's not perfect because the viruses quickly adapt. A virus quickly adapts. It has to adapt. And in order to adapt, it has to mutate. It has to mutate. That's what the virus has to do. It has to change gears. It has to change gears fast. Because viruses, the majority of all viruses, don't want you really getting hurt in the end. They want to live forever and live free and live happy. They don't want to hurt you in the end, just like the retrovirus, HIV retrovirus. It is never there to kill anybody. Retroviruses don't kill anybody. It's other things that kill people. That's what happened with the whole AIDS epidemic all along. People aren't dying anymore of AIDS because of new AIDS drugs. People aren't dying anymore of AIDS because the fear of God and the fear of dying and all that's been dropped back. Because then that's a big part of why people died so much, is they thought they had a death sentence that would kill them in 2 days. Because that's how it was purported out there. Misinformation. It hurt so many people. But retroviruses and all viruses, not all viruses. I'm sorry. Viruses that are more just stealth, more natural based. They have a lineage in our history. So a virus can get this poison in its system, and die. But the viruses quickly learn from another virus that died. It quickly learns. And so it actually adapts. And once it adapts, it can handle a higher level, a level 6, a level, higher of poison. So as it's eating the dead cells, the human cells, our cells, as it's eating the dead cells out of some tissue, out of some connective tissue, out of an organ, out of the liver, out of the lung, wherever cancers go and wherever cancers start and all these different things, it's eating all of this. And getting these dead cells, it's remanufacturing once again, and it's getting stronger. And that stronger material kills a few more virus cells that come along and try to engage. And then more adapting occurs and more mutating of viruses have to amp up, and the viruses become a different type of virus. And not a virus that can make you feel super duper sick necessarily. Viruses you don't even feel. You're not feeling anything going on. You're barely feeling anything. There's nothing even going on. You're just living your life. All's good. So basically that adapting occurs, and the virus has to become something different. So eventually the virus goes to another stage where it mutates so destructively or so differently because of the level of toxins that were constantly remanufactured over and over and over again. It had to change its game to the point where that viral cell became now a cancer cell. The virus cell is a cancer cell. That's when it became a cancer cell, and nowhere in medical history do they know this part yet. They know that viruses could be a cancer cell. They know that some viruses create cancers. They finally know that now. Guess what? I knew that as a child. I got that information from my source as a child before it was even out there. But they know that now, but they don't know the process of how it gets there. And the reason why they're not going to is because that virus isn't your fault that you have it, if you do. If like they say, 50% of the world's population is going to have cancer in 20 years versus, the other 50% not having, if the rates are going to be that high, it's not your fault that you have that virus, and it's not your fault. You have those chemicals, those chemical compounds, those destructive compounds, those toxins. It's not your fault. It's somebody else's fault, believe it or not. And it points back to the industries. And if it gets out that none of this cancer was your fault at all and someone else's fault, and it gets out there, then there's hell to pay, and there's trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in damages. Look at asbestos cancer, mesothelioma. Look at asbestos cancer, okay? They got a $30 billion fund sitting out there for just one cancer, an industrial cancer, asbestos. By the way, asbestos doesn't need a virus. That's why I didn't add it to all the toxins and all the poisons I talked about. It doesn't need a virus. Asbestos on its own can create an asbestos cancer. It's literally its own breed. Its own breed, completely separate from 99% of all the other cancers, which, guess what? Are viral cancers. 99% of all the cancers out there are viral cancers, you guys, except for asbestos cancer. But look, there's a $30 billion fund for people who've been afflicted by asbestos cancer, right? Right? Well, because it was somebody's fault. But if we were told that it took a virus and it took all these different hosts of chemicals right down since the Industrial Revolution, the corporations and the industries and everything else going back since 1799, since 1817, the birth of the Industrial Revolution, would have to come up with funds of billions and billions of dollars. It would equal trillions and trillions, and especially since it's going to carry on for decades and decades and decades, and more people are going to get cancer and sick with cancer and die and all these other things and suffer with ever in the future, unless they learn information and protect themselves really and watch their back. And because more and more that's going to happen, it wouldn't just be some asbestos fund of $30 billion. It would be in the trillions, higher than the country's debt of $20 trillion that we have now, which is the country's debt. It would be higher than $19-20 trillion. Can you believe that? Yes, it would be higher than that. So it has to be your fault. That has to be your fault. Something that is in your genes because you got bad genes. Genes play a role in a lot of different things. Don't get me wrong, but it's not why someone gets cancer. That's why the BRCA1, BRCA2 gene with breast cancer, that's why the majority of women with breast cancer don't have the BRCA1 or BRCA2 gene. But what happened is the misinformation has to get out there. They have to feed it to people, because if you know the truth, someone's going to take the blame down the road. Someone's going to find out how the first Epstein-Barrs and the first HHV6s and the first different viruses started back in the early 1900s. And who started and where? Someone's going to find out. Another $5 trillion right there, payback. Someone's going to find out also all the chemical companies, which chemicals and everything else. That's why you can't really get a straight anything out of anybody.